The Courageous Women Who is Organizing Separated Mothers Inside an ICE Detention Center by Johnathan Blitzer. Of the 2,053 children separated from their parents at the border since May, only 522 have been returned in their families, according to the government. Last September, 8 months before the Trump administration announced its zero-tolerance policy for immigrants at the U.S. the government separated Mabel Gonzalez from her two teenage sons. The three of them had fled Honduras that summer and entered the U.S. through the desert in New Mexico. "No one saw us when we crossed the border," she told me. "I was carrying a bottle of water and I raised it over my head and started waving," unquote. She was trying to get attention of the Border Patrol agents in the distance. "I was seeking asylum and I wanted them to know that." She said by law, migrants can request asylum after they've entered the U.S., but during the summer of 2017 in parts of New Mexico and West Texas, the government was quietly testing out the zero-tolerance policy. Before migrants could make an asylum claim, they were charged with the crime of entering the U.S. illegally and were prosecuted. In the process, those who crossed the border with children were separated from them. The border agents who apprehended Gonzalez told her that she and her sons, who were 13 and 15, would be released to a local migrant shelter. The next evening, another agent informed them that there had been a change of plans. "You're a prisoner now," he told Gonzalez. "We're going to have to take your kids away from you," unquote. She entered criminal custody under the mistaken impression that she'd be reunited with her children once she got out. On Wednesday, I visited Gonzalez at an Immigration and Customs Enforcement Processing Center in El Paso, where she's been held since September. It was a strange moment at which to make her acquaintance. Earlier this week, as public outrage over zero tolerance mounted, the Trump administration announced that it was effectively ending the policy. The government could not find detention facilities to house all the families it was prosecuting. The night before Gonzalez and I met, a federal judge in California had issued a strongly worded injunction demanding that the government stop separating families at the border and that it reunite parents and the children within the next 30 days. For children under the age of 5, the deadline for the government was 2 weeks. It's doubtful that the Trump administration will be able to fully comply with the order, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Of the 2,053 children separated from their parents at the border since May, only 522 have been returned to their families. Many of the parents in government custody still don't know where the children are, and lawyers in West Texas think that the number of separated families is even higher. Some 700 children were separated from their parents between October 2017 and April 2018, more than 100 of whom were under the age of 4. How many of these families have been reunited is unclear. El Paso was the training ground for family separations. Veronica Escobar, a former county judge and a Democratic candidate for that U.S. House, told me this week what that means, that there probably are more children who are lost in the system, unquote. For the past 9 months, Gonzalez has been anguished witness to the zero-tolerance policy from start to finish. She has met dozens of mothers who were separated from their children, including 10 women who have been detained in the same facility since last year. In her first few months in detention, she told me a few women arrived with questions about their children's whereabouts. By this spring, the scale of the new policy was becoming apparent. since April. According to Gonzalez, about 20 women in the facility have been deported without their children. Each week since then, more women were separated from their children have arrived. I kept seeing mothers in her crying and asking why their children were taken from them. She said, I cried with them and I told them, someone will come and help us. I'm going to make sure of that. Gonzalez was a pastor in Honduras, and her quiet, dignified manner has helped calm the other women in detention. In late April, she decided to start documenting their cases. We're not allowed to have notebooks, she said. We'd ask for individual sheets of paper. At first, she took down the information of a few women in her section of the facility. Then, in the mess hall during lunch, she stealthily distributed sheets to women from the other cell blocks. Some of them were wary of sharing their personal details, but others trusted Gonzalez, calling her reverentially La Pastora. Over the next few weeks, Gonzalez gradually compiled the entries in a clean script on lined paper. Each woman's name was listed, followed by her detainee number, country of origin, and cell block number. Below every name was a note about the identity and age of the women's children. I came here thinking I was going to see my children, Gonzalez told me. That's what I was told, and the other mothers thought so too. Everyone thought that it was a lie. I finally realized that no one was going to help us find our kids. We'd have to do it on our own, unquote. On May 20th, Gonzalez gave the list to Franciscan sister named Mary K. Mahowald, who works for the Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center in El Paso. Mahowald makes frequent trips to this detention facility to comfort women and to refer to them to the center's legal team. She started visiting the women on Gonzalez's list, getting basic information about their cases and having them sign waivers so that lawyers could follow up. I met one woman, a Guatemalan mother, who cried for the whole hour we talked. Mahawad told me, it was hard, but I had to keep it together. I had to get the information. Some of the women have been too traumatized to trust her. One of them said to me, "What am I signing? Are you trying to keep my child?" She said, Las Americas is a small organization with limited resources. Linda Rivas, its executive director and lead attorney, told me, I want to be able to help every single client in detention, but how can we? We decided to focus our efforts on this list. These were women who were crying out to us for help. In addition to Rivera's and Mahawad, the team consists of 2 assistants, a volunteer, and a newly hired intern. As they worked their way down Gonzalez's list, Gonzalez was mailing new documents to the Las Americas office. She also sent to the list to local immigration lawyers, elected officials, and officers at ICE. When I met Mahawad on Wednesday morning, she showed me an envelope that had just arrived. In the top left corner, Gonzalez's full name and detainee number were listed as the return address. Last week, the list had 10 names on it, and now it had 14. When families were separated at the border under zero tolerance, the parents and children were placed in the custody of 2 separate federal departments with different processes governing how to release them. The Department of Health and Human Services, which is in charge of the children, needs to vet a parent or guardian before releasing a child. The process takes time and forces parents to produce documented proof of their relationship. The government is vetting the same parent that it has taken the kid away from. Rivera said, the Department of Homeland Security, which is in charge of the parents, has the ability to release detainees with an ankle monitor or a future court date, but it seems unwilling to do so. Over the weekend, DHS issued a statement describing how it planned to reunite families. It called the approach reunification and removal. The idea was to unite parents and children so that they could be deported together. Parents with pending asylum claims now face a choice. They can remain separated from their children while waiting for a court date, which could be several months away, or away at least, or they can withdraw their asylum claim in order to be reunited with their children sooner and face deportation together. A crisis at the border, more coverage of the Trump administration's immigration policy from the New Yorker. Because Gonzalez has been in detention for so long, her children have already been released to a relative living in the U.S. It's expensive for her to call them from inside the facility, 85 cents per minute. She speaks to them once a week, usually on Sundays. I feel empty when I don't hear their voices, she told me. Her body shuddered while she spoke about them, and she cried without removing her eyeglasses from her face. Last week, Gonzalez told Rivers that she couldn't stand to be in detention any longer. She was beginning to resign herself to her eventual deportation. At least my children are safe, she told me. But she was also terrified of returning home. Hitmen from a criminal syndicate in Honduras murdered 6 of her family members, including 2 of her brothers, and none of her relatives have remained in the country. They've been killed or they've been driven out, she said. Over the past 7 years, Gonzalez and her husband, mother, and children had moved to different parts of the country, spending 2 years in hiding at one point, but the threats continued. When she fled to southern Mexico with her children last year, the hitmen found her there, and she was forced to move again. Late last month, an immigration judge rejected her asylum claim despite the detailed records that Gonzalez presented of the dangers she faced in Honduras. The judge looked at me in the eye and said he understood the situation I was in, Gonzalez told me. But he said that the law didn't leave him with anything he could do to help me, unquote. In the U.S., judges have been rejecting asylum claims at the highest rate in more than a decade, and earlier this month, the Attorney General issued a ruling that reversed decades of asylum jurisprudence and will make it much harder for Central Americans to qualify for protection under the U.S. law. Rivas is trying to mount one last appeal. I tell Mabel, you are very brave, Rivas said. You are an inspiration to the other women in detention. You helped us find them and get them in touch with their children. You did nothing wrong to come here with yours. This is the end of this excerpt. Thank you.